Elena Morgan slipped through the revolving doors of the Westfield Financial Building at precisely 7:43 a.m., just as she had every weekday for the past 7 years. The security guard barely glanced up as she flashed her ID badge, a routine so familiar it required no acknowledgement. She was simply part of the morning rhythm, as expected as the elevator chime or the hum of the coffee machines warming up on each floor. In the elevator, she pressed the button for the 14th floor and stepped to the back corner, making herself small as others crowded in. A group of executives from the marketing department entered, their animated conversation about last night's game filling the small space. One of them bumped Elena's shoulder, forcing her to steady herself against the wall. "Oh, sorry," the man said with a quick glance that didn't quite reach her eyes before returning to his conversation. Elena nodded politely, though he had already turned away. It was a perfect example of how people saw her in this building, if they saw her at all. The marketing team exited on the 12th floor, and Elena let out a small breath she hadn't realized she was holding. When the doors opened on 14, she stepped out into the familiar landscape of beige cubicles and the soft clicking of keyboards already at work. "Morning," she offered to Raj, whose desk sat at the entrance to their department. He responded with a distracted wave, eyes never leaving his computer screen where spreadsheet columns reflected in his glasses. Her own cubicle sat in the back corner of the floor, away from the windows and the main walkways. She had decorated it sparingly, a small plant that required minimal care, a calendar with landscapes she'd never visited, and a single photo frame turned slightly away from any casual observer's view. The picture inside showed a younger Elena sitting at a grand piano, her face alight with a joy that her current self rarely displayed. Elena settled into her chair and powered up her computer. As the system hummed to life, her fingers instinctively spread and stretched, a brief piano exercise she'd never abandoned even after all these years away from the keys. The movement was subtle. No one would notice, but it was a tiny rebellion, a moment of remembering who she had been before becoming Elena from accounting. The morning unfolded, as mornings always did. She processed invoices, reconciled accounts, and prepared reports that would travel up the corporate ladder with her name neatly typed at the bottom, but rarely registered by those who benefited from her meticulous work. At lunch, she ate a sandwich at her desk, scrolling through a classical music forum while her coworkers gathered in the break room, their laughter occasionally drifting over the cubicle walls. "Elena, did you finish the quarterly projection reports?" Her supervisor, Thomas Harlow, appeared suddenly beside her desk, making her quickly switch browser tabs. "Yes, I sent them over this morning," she replied, pulling up the email as proof. Thomas frowned slightly. "Didn't see it. Send it again, will you? The executive team needs it for the 4 o'clock meeting." "Of course," Elena said, already forwarding the email she'd sent 3 hours earlier. She watched as Thomas's phone pinged with the notification. "There it is." He nodded without looking up from his device. "Good. Oh, and we need the Henderson account numbers updated before end of day." "Already done," Elena said. But Thomas was already walking away, attention captured by someone more visible in the office hierarchy. At her desk, Elena opened her drawer and touched the worn program hidden beneath her stapler. Juilliard School of Music, it proclaimed across the top, with her name listed among the performers at the Winter Showcase 11 years ago. Her fingertips traced the embossed lettering, a habit formed over countless afternoons when the walls of her cubicle seemed particularly close. She had been different then, confident, passionate with a future stretching bright before her. Her professors had called her gifted, predicting a career of concert halls and standing ovations. Piano had been her voice, her truest form of expression since childhood. Then life happened, as it often does. Her father's sudden illness, the mounting medical bills, her mother's struggle to keep their home. The practical choice had been clear even as it broke her heart. She withdrew from school, took an accounting course at the community college, and found stability at Westfield Financial. The company had hired her as a junior accountant, impressed by her attention to detail and quiet efficiency. Over the years, she'd received modest promotions and acceptable performance reviews. She was reliable, competent, and entirely unremarkable in the eyes of her colleagues. The afternoon crawled by in a series of spreadsheets and email responses. At 3:15, Elena heard excited voices from the direction of the break room. Curious, She stood slightly to peer over her cubicle wall. A small crowd had gathered around the bulletin board where company announcements were posted. Patricia from Human Resources was tacking up a colorful flyer while explaining something that had the group alternating between groans and laughter. Elena waited until most people had returned to their desks before approaching the board herself. The flyer announced the annual company talent showcase, scheduled for next month at the Grand Plaza Hotel. All proceeds benefit the Children's Hospital Fund, it proclaimed in bold letters. Smaller text detailed the evening's format: dinner, performances by Westfield employees, and a silent auction. For a moment, Elena simply stared at the announcement, an unexpected warmth spreading through her chest. A memory surfaced, the weight of ivory keys beneath her fingers, the perfect moment of silence before a piece began, the way the world disappeared when she played. Thinking of signing up? The voice startled her from her thoughts. Lisa from reception stood beside her reading the flyer. I did it last year, sang a Whitney Houston song. Totally butchered the high notes, but it was for charity, right? She laughed. Oh, I don't know, Elena said, her voice soft. Maybe. Lisa looked surprised, as if she hadn't expected a response. Well, the sign-up sheet's in HR if you change your mind. What would you do anyway? The question hung in the air between them. Elena could feel her pulse quickening slightly. I used to play piano, she admitted. Piano? Really? Lisa's eyebrows raised. Like Mary Had a Little Lamb or actual songs? Elena smiled slightly. Actual songs. Classical mostly. Wow, wouldn't have pegged you for that, Lisa said, her tone suggesting she'd never given much thought to what Elena might be capable of outside the office. Well, good luck if you do it. With that, she was gone, already focused on her next conversation. Back at her desk, Elena found herself opening a new browser tab. She typed Grand Plaza Hotel Ballroom into the search bar and clicked on images. There it was, a gleaming black grand piano positioned at the end of an elegant room. Her fingers twitched slightly at the sight. When 5 o'clock arrived, Elena shut down her computer with unusual quickness. Instead of her typical route home, she made a detour, walking 6 blocks to a small music shop tucked between a bookstore and a cafe. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, breathing in the familiar scents of wood polish and paper. Can I help you? Asked an older man arranging sheet music on a display. I'm just looking, Elena replied, moving toward the back where several upright pianos stood in a row. Feel free to play if you'd like, the man offered, noticing her gaze. That's what they're here for. Elena hesitated, then sat at the bench of a modest upright. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling the cool smoothness beneath her fingers. For a moment, she didn't move, suddenly aware that it had been nearly 2 years since she'd touched a real piano, making do with a small keyboard in her apartment that she played with headphones late at night. Slowly, she began to play, a simple Bach prelude, one of the first pieces she had mastered as a child. Her fingers were stiff at first, missing the fluid grace they once possessed, but by the middle of the piece something shifted. Her body remembered what her conscious mind had tucked away. The notes flowed more easily, her posture changed, and a small smile formed on her lips without her awareness. When the final chord faded, Elena realized the shop had gone quiet. The owner stood nearby, sheet music forgotten in his hands. That was beautiful, he said simply. You've played for many years, it wasn't a question, but Elena nodded anyway. I did. Not so much anymore. That's a shame, he replied, studying her with kind eyes. Talents like yours aren't common. Elena felt something catch in her throat, not quite emotion, but the recognition of a truth she had buried beneath years of practical decisions and quiet compromises. As she walked home in the fading evening light, her mind kept returning to the flyer on the bulletin board. The company talent show was mostly an excuse for colleagues to laugh at each other's amateur attempts at entertainment while raising money for a good cause. No one would expect anything serious, least of all from Elena Morgan, the quiet woman from accounting who processed their expense reports and corrected their budget mistakes. The thought should have deterred her. Instead, she felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in years. Defiance, maybe. Or possibility. In her apartment that night, she pulled out her keyboard from the closet and set it up on the kitchen table. She didn't play immediately, just sat looking at the keys in the dim light of her small living room. Then she reached for her phone and pulled up the HR department's contact information. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she would put her name on the sign-up sheet, and then she would need to practice. The next morning, Elena arrived at the office earlier than usual, her heart beating a little faster than normal. She had barely slept, her mind filled with music she hadn't allowed herself to really think about for years. The office was quiet, with only the cleaning staff and a few early birds present. She made her way to the HR department, where a sign-up sheet for the talent showcase was taped to the door. She stood in front of it for a long moment, pen in hand. The sheet already had several names, mostly from the sales and marketing departments, people known for being outgoing and comfortable in the spotlight. Her hand trembled slightly as she wrote Elena Morgan, piano, in her neat handwriting at the bottom of the list. "Well, that's a surprise," came a voice behind her. Elena turned to find Diane from HR watching her with raised eyebrows. Diane was already dressed impeccably at 7:30 a.m., not a hair out of place, her presence as polished as her resume. "I didn't know you played," Diane continued, her tone suggesting she didn't quite believe it. "I do," Elena said simply, capping her pen. "What will you play? Chopsticks?" Diane laughed at her own joke. "Sorry, that was rude. It's just, you've never mentioned any hobbies at the company mixers." Elena felt heat rising to her cheeks. "I studied at Juilliard, actually, before I came to Westfield." Diane's perfectly shaped eyebrows shot up even higher. "Juilliard? As in the music school?" "Yes," Elena replied, wishing she hadn't shared that detail. It felt too personal, too revealing of a life she'd packed away. "Well," Diane said, looking at her with new curiosity. "That's unexpected. Looking forward to it, then." By mid-morning, word had somehow spread about Elena's sign-up. She could feel the difference in the way people looked at her as she walked to the copy room. Not with recognition exactly, but with a kind of puzzled reassessment, as if a piece of office furniture had suddenly announced it could tap dance. "Hey, piano girl," called out Jerry from the sales department as she passed his desk. "Heard you're gonna rock the showcase. What's your go-to song? Something from The Office theme?" His cubicle mate snickered. Elena gave a small smile and kept walking. She was used to being invisible. Being the subject of jokes was new, but not entirely unexpected. At lunch, she ate at her desk as usual, but she was surprised when Thomas, her supervisor, stopped by, leaning against her cubicle wall with forced casualness. "So, I hear you signed up for the talent thing," he said, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "I did," she replied, closing the browser tab where she'd been researching piano rentals for practice. "That's great, team spirit and all that," he nodded. "Just, we're expecting some big clients to attend, right? It's a fundraiser, but also a networking opportunity. The company image and all that." Elena looked at him directly now. "Are you asking me not to participate?" Thomas shifted uncomfortably. No, of course not. Just making sure you're prepared. We wouldn't want anyone to be embarrassed." "I won't embarrass the company, Thomas," Elena said quietly. He seemed relieved. Great. Maybe something simple, A little background music while people mingle or something." After he left, Elena sat very still for a moment. Then she opened a new browser tab and typed Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto No. 2 into the search bar. The piece was challenging, emotional, technically demanding, and absolutely not background music. She had performed it during her final year at Juilliard, before everything changed. It had brought the audience to their feet then. She clicked play on a video of a performance and put in her earbuds. As the powerful opening chords filled her ears, something shifted inside her chest, a rekindling of purpose, of fire. Later that afternoon, the marketing team sent out the first email about the showcase to the entire company. Elena opened it and scrolled through the details: date, time, dress code, charity information. At the bottom was a list of the participants and their acts. Most descriptions were elaborate and enthusiastic. Tyler Johnston Comedy Stand-Up Spectacular and Accounting Department Choir, Broadway Medley Extravaganza. Next to her name was simply Elena Morgan, piano. She wasn't surprised. She was, after all, just Elena from accounting. Reliable, invisible Elena who processed numbers and kept to herself. No one expected anything spectacular or worthy of exclamation points from her. As she was leaving that evening, she overheard two of the marketing team members talking by the elevator. "Did you see that woman from accounting signed up for the showcase? The quiet one? Yeah, weird, right? What's she going to do? Excel spreadsheet tricks?" Their laughter followed her into the elevator. Elena kept her eyes on the floor numbers as they descended, her fingers moving slightly at her sides, playing imaginary keys. Instead of going straight home, she returned to the music shop she had visited the day before. The same older man was there, arranging sheet music displays. "You're back," he said with a genuine smile. "Come to play again?" "Actually," Elena began, "I'm looking for somewhere to practice. I signed up for a performance, but I don't have access to a proper piano." The man considered her for a moment. "When's the performance?" 3 weeks from now," he nodded slowly. "I open the shop at 9, but I'm here by 6 to do inventory and paperwork. If you wanted to come by in those morning hours, you could use one of the back room pianos to practice. It's not a grand, but it's a decent upright, properly tuned." Elena blinked in surprise. "You'd let me do that?" "Music should be played," he said simply. "The instruments sit quiet too much of the time." "I couldn't pay much," Elena started. He waved a hand dismissively. "First session free. After that, maybe you help me organize the sheet music inventory sometimes. I'm not as quick with the computer as I used to be." Relief and gratitude washed over her. "Thank you, Mr. Chen," he supplied. "Michael Chen, and you are?" "Elena Morgan." "Well, Elena Morgan, I look forward to hearing what you're preparing." For the first time that day, Elena's smile reached her eyes. The following morning, she arrived at the shop at 5:45 a.m., worried about being late. Mr. Chen was already there, unlocking the front door. "Right on time," he said, though she was 15 minutes early. "Coffee?" He showed her to the back room where a well-maintained upright piano sat near a window. It wasn't the grand piano she had once been accustomed to, but when she sat and played a few experimental chords, the sound was rich and true. "I'll be up front if you need anything," Mr. Chen said, leaving her alone with the instrument. Elena placed her hands on the keys and began with simple scales to warm up. Her fingers were stiff. Years of typing reports had maintained their dexterity but not their strength or stretch for complex pieces. She winced at a few missed notes but kept going, gradually increasing the difficulty. After 30 minutes of exercises, she took a deep breath and began the opening chords of the Rachmaninoff concerto. She fumbled immediately, her hands not yet remembering the precise movements required. She tried again, more slowly, focusing on accuracy rather than emotion. By 8:30, when Mr. Chen poked his head in to check on her, she was drenched in sweat, frustrated, and doubting her decision to sign up for the showcase. "How's it going?" he asked. "Terribly," she admitted. "I'm trying to play Rachmaninoff, but my hands won't cooperate." He nodded thoughtfully. "The body remembers, but it needs time to wake up. Like starting any exercise after years of rest? I don't have much time." "Then you must be patient with yourself," he said. "Play something simpler first. Remind your hands what it feels like to make beauty without struggle." Elena thought for a moment, then began to play a Bach prelude, the same one she'd played in the shop the day before. It flowed more easily, and by the end her hands felt more like her own again. "Better," Mr. Chen observed. "Now try a small section of your difficult piece. Just a phrase played very slowly." She did as he suggested, working through just 8 measures of the Rachmaninoff at half speed. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. "Thank you," she said as she gathered her things to leave. "Can I come back tomorrow?" "The piano will be waiting," he replied. At work that day, Elena noticed a new flyer about the showcase posted on the bulletin board. It featured photos of past performances and highlighted some of this year's acts. There was no mention of her at all. During the afternoon staff meeting, Thomas discussed the upcoming event. "We've got some great talent lined up," he said enthusiastically. "Tyler's comedy, The Accounting Choir, which still needs volunteers, by the way, and a magic show from the IT department." Elena sat quietly, not expecting to be mentioned. She was surprised when Thomas added, almost as an afterthought, "Oh, and Elena's going to play the piano, so we've got some, nice background music, too." Several people turned to look at her with expressions ranging from surprise to amusement. She kept her eyes on her notepad, but inside a small flame of determination grew stronger. That evening, she stayed up late searching online for recordings of Rachmaninoff's concerto. She watched performers' hands studying their techniques and expressions. In her small apartment, she practiced finger positions on her portable keyboard until well past midnight, the headphones ensuring her neighbors wouldn't be disturbed. In the darkness before sleep, Elena made herself a promise. She might be just the office worker to them now, but in 3 weeks, they would see her, really see her, for the first time. The next 3 weeks took on a rhythm entirely different from anything Elena had experienced in years. Each morning, her alarm would go off at 4 a.m., and instead of hitting snooze, she would rise immediately, filled with a sense of purpose that had long been absent from her life. By 4:30, she would arrive at Mr. Chen's music shop. The first time she arrived that early, she worried about waking him, but she found him already there, a cup of tea in hand. "I'm an early riser," he explained when she apologized. "Have been my whole life. Music sounds different in the early morning, cleaner somehow." The back room became her sanctuary. Each session began the same way: scales and exercises to warm up her hands, then Bach to remind her fingers of their natural grace, and finally, Rachmaninoff, the challenging concerto that had once been her signature piece at Juilliard. The first week was humbling. Her fingers, stiff from years of underuse, fumbled over passages that had once flowed effortlessly. The complex rhythms and emotional dynamics of Rachmaninoff demanded a technical precision she was struggling to recapture. "It's like trying to run a marathon." After years without running, she told Mr. Chen one morning, massaging her cramping hands. "The body remembers," he assured her, "but you must be patient." By the second week, something began to shift. Her hands ached less and her muscle memory started to awaken. She still stumbled over the most difficult passages, but for brief moments the music would flow through her as it once had, and those glimpses of her former self were intoxicating. At the office, Elena moved through her days in a kind of daze. She completed her work with the same efficiency as always, but her mind was elsewhere, counting rhythms, imagining finger placements, hearing melodies beneath the hum of fluorescent lights and office chatter. "You seem different lately," Raj commented one day as they waited for the coffee machine. "More, I don't know, distant?" Elena smiled slightly. "Just busy with something." "The piano thing?" he asked. "People are talking about it. Nobody knew you played." "Nobody asked," she replied simply, taking her coffee back to her desk. The buzz about the talent showcase was growing throughout the office. Posters appeared in the elevators and hallways. The marketing team sent daily email updates about ticket sales and auction items. Each morning, Elena checked these communications with increasing anxiety, noting that her name remained minimized or missing entirely from the promotional materials. One Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks before the showcase, Thomas called her into his office. He closed the door before speaking, which immediately put Elena on edge. "Elena, I wanted to check in about your performance," he began, his discomfort evident. "The event committee was wondering about your piece. They're trying to finalize the program order." "I'm playing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, she said. Thomas looked blank. "Is that well known?" "It's a classical piece. Very emotional, very powerful." He nodded, though it was clear the name meant nothing to him. "And how long is it?" "The full concerto is about 40 minutes, but I'll just play the first movement, which is about 12 minutes. Thomas's eyebrows shot up. 12 minutes? That's quite a lot of time. Most acts are keeping it to 5 minutes or less." Elena felt a flash of irritation. Tyler from sales has a 15-minute comedy routine on the schedule. "Well, yes, but that's different. People expect entertainment from Tyler. He's, outgoing." Thomas shifted in his seat. "Look, Elena, I'm just trying to make sure you're comfortable up there. Nobody wants to see anyone struggle through something too ambitious." The implication was clear and it stung. "I won't struggle," she said quietly. Great, Thomas replied, clearly relieved to end the conversation. "Maybe just consider something shorter? More accessible? We want to keep people engaged." That evening at practice, Elena attacked the piano with unusual force, channeling her frustration into the powerful opening chords of the concerto. Mr. Chen, who usually left her alone during practice, paused in the doorway to listen. "You play with anger today," he observed when she finished the section. "My boss suggested I play something more accessible," she said, the words bitter on her tongue. Mr. Chen considered this. "Why did you choose this piece?" The question caught her off guard. Because it's challenging. Because it shows technical skill. Is that all?" Elena thought for a moment. "No, I chose it because it says things I can't say with words. The beginning. Those dark, heavy chords that build and build. That's what these past 7 years have felt like. Working in a place where no one sees me. Where I'm just a function, not a person. She played the next section where the music shifts, the melody emerging like a voice rising above the storm. And this part, this is what I've kept hidden. This is who I really am, underneath all those spreadsheets and reports. Her fingers moved more confidently now, finding their way through the complex passage with growing assurance. The whole piece is like that struggle and beauty and triumph, and longing, all the things I've felt but never expressed. She stopped playing, suddenly self-conscious. That probably sounds silly. Not silly, Mr. Chen said seriously. Essential. You have chosen the right piece. The next morning at the office, Elena found a printed program for the showcase on her desk. She scanned it quickly, her heart sinking when she saw her listing. 15 p.m. Elena Morgan, piano, 5 minutes. They had cut her time in half without consulting her. 5 minutes wasn't enough for even the introduction of the Rachmaninoff. She clutched the paper, a wave of disappointment washing over her. Oh good, you saw the program, Thomas said, appearing beside her desk. We had to make some adjustments to keep the evening moving. Hope that works for you. Elena opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. What would be the point? In their eyes, she was just Elena from accounting, the quiet woman who processed expense reports. They had already decided what she was capable of. Fine, she said flatly. Great, Thomas replied, already walking away. Looking forward to it. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She paced her small apartment, trying to decide what to do. Should she cut the Rachmaninoff down to a 5-minute excerpt? Should she switch to something simpler, as everyone seemed to expect? Or should she withdraw entirely and avoid the disappointment of not being able to truly play what mattered to her? At 3 a.m., unable to rest, she sat at her keyboard with headphones on. Instead of practicing, she simply listened to a recording of the full concerto, closing her eyes and letting the music wash over her. By the final notes, she knew what she had to do. The next morning, she arrived at the office earlier than usual and went straight to Diane's office in HR. I need to speak with you about the showcase. The evening of the showcase arrived with a flurry of nerves and activity throughout the Westfield Financial office. Staff members left early to prepare, the women discussing outfits while the men adjusted ties and joked about stage fright. Elena worked quietly at her desk until 5:30, long after most of her colleagues had departed. You're still here? Raj asked, stopping by her cubicle with his coat already on. Shouldn't you be getting ready? Practicing or whatever? Elena saved her file and began shutting down her computer. I'm ready enough, she said with a calm she didn't entirely feel. Well, good luck tonight. I'll be cheering for you. She looked up, surprised by his sincerity. Thank you. At home, Elena stood before her closet for a long moment. She owned few dresses, having little need for formal wear in her day-to-day life. Her hand finally settled on a simple black dress she had purchased years ago for a cousin's wedding. Classic and understated, it had hung unworn for too long. As she dressed, she avoided looking too carefully in the mirror. Tonight wasn't about her appearance, but about what lived inside her, what had been dormant for too many years. She twisted her hair into a neat bun, applied minimal makeup, and slipped into low heels that wouldn't interfere with the piano pedals. Before leaving, she sat at her small keyboard one last time, not to practice, but to center herself. She closed her eyes and placed her hands on the keys without pressing them, feeling the connection between her fingers and the instrument, remembering who she had been before life's complications had redirected her path. She played a single chord, then nodded to herself and rose. The Grand Plaza Hotel was lit up magnificently as Elena approached. Valets were parking expensive cars and people in fine attire streamed through the main entrance. She hesitated for a moment before joining them, suddenly feeling out of place. These were her colleagues, but in this setting, outside the familiar confines of the office, they seemed like strangers. In the hotel lobby, a sign directed Westfield Financial employees to the Crystal Ballroom on the second floor. Elena followed it, climbing the grand staircase slowly, her hand trailing along the polished wooden railing. At the top, she paused, taking a deep breath before entering. The ballroom was transformed from its usual elegance into a festive venue with the Westfield blue and silver colors prominent in the decorations. Round tables filled most of the space, with a small stage area set up at one end. And there, just as she had seen in the online photos, stood a magnificent grand piano, its gleaming black surface catching the light. "Elena, there you are." She turned to see Thomas waving her over to a table near the back of the room. He had saved her a seat with other members of the accounting department, none of whom she was particularly close with. "We were wondering if you'd make it," he said as she sat down. "The program had a last-minute change. I hope that's okay." Elena's stomach tightened. "What change?" "Nothing major," he assured her. "They just moved you up in the lineup a bit. You'll go after the department choir now around 8:30 instead of 9:15. She nodded, relieved it wasn't another time cut. "That's fine." Dinner was served, a fancy affair with multiple courses that Elena barely tasted. Around her, conversations flowed easily as alcohol loosened tongues and people relaxed into the evening. The executives sat at front tables, occasionally laughing loudly enough to be heard throughout the room. No one at Elena's table spoke much to her directly, perhaps sensing her preoccupation. At 8:20, the company's CEO took the small stage to welcome everyone and introduce the first act. Elena looked down at the program that had been placed at each setting. True to Thomas's word, her name now appeared earlier in the lineup, but the time allotment remained at 5 minutes, and her listing was still just piano, with no mention of what she would play. The first few performances were met with enthusiastic applause from the increasingly jovial crowd. A sales representative sang a popular country song, 2 women from marketing performed a dance routine, and the IT department's magic show drew genuine laughter and amazement. Elena watched it all as if from a great distance, her mind focused on what was to come, her fingers occasionally moving slightly in her lap, playing phantom notes. The accounting department choir was announced next. 6 of Elena's co-workers, including Thomas, took the stage in matching blue ties and white shirts. They launched into a medley of Broadway songs, slightly off-key but enthusiastic. The audience clapped along good-naturedly. As they finished to warm applause, Elena knew her moment had arrived. She glanced at the grand piano waiting on stage and felt a curious calm settle over her. This was what she had prepared for. This was what she had been missing for 7 years. The MC, a woman from the marketing department named Patricia, returned to the microphone. "Wasn't that wonderful? Let's hear it again for our accounting choir." More applause. Elena rose quietly from her seat, smoothing her dress. "Next up we have..." "Oh." Patricia squinted at her note cards. "We have Elena Morgan from accounting playing the piano." The introduction was delivered with such casual disinterest that few people even turned to look as Elena made her way to the stage. Conversations continued around many tables. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed loudly at a joke. No one seemed to notice or care that the quiet woman from accounting was about to perform. Elena climbed the 3 small steps to the stage and approached the piano. It was even more beautiful up close. A concert grand with a rich, dark finish and perfectly positioned under the stage lights. She sat on the bench, adjusting its height slightly, and took a moment to simply touch the keys, feeling their weight and responsiveness. She looked out at the audience. Most people weren't even watching. At the executive table, the CEO was checking his phone. Thomas and the accounting choir had just returned to their seats and were still congratulating each other. At a table near the front, Jerry from sales was telling a story that had his table mates in stitches. Elena took a deep breath and placed her hands in position for the opening chords of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. In that moment of silence, just before she began, Elena thought of all the mornings at Mr. Chen's shop, of the music she had kept inside for so long, of the person she had once been and still was beneath the layers of compromise. She thought of the program listing her for just 5 minutes, of Thomas suggesting something more accessible, of colleagues who had never bothered to ask who she really was. Then she pressed down on the keys, and the first powerful chord filled the ballroom. The effect was immediate and electric. The deep, resonant sound cut through every conversation like a knife. Heads turned. Glasses paused halfway to lips. The laughter at Jerry's table died instantly. Elena didn't see any of this. Her eyes were closed, her entire being focused on the music flowing from her fingers. The opening chords of Rachmaninoff built in intensity, each one more commanding than the last, filling the space with a sound so powerful and unexpected that it demanded attention. When she transitioned into the main theme, her fingers flying across the keys with precision and passion, a complete silence had fallen over the ballroom. Not a whisper, not the clink of silverware, not a single shuffled foot disturbed the music that poured from the grand piano. Elena played with her whole body, swaying slightly with the emotional crescendos, her face reflecting every nuance of the piece, the struggle, the yearning, the triumph embedded in Rachmaninoff's composition. She had forgotten about the 5-minute limit, forgotten about her audience, forgotten everything except the music itself and the joy of finally releasing what had been trapped inside her for so long. The first movement built to its climactic middle section, and Elena's fingers danced across the keys with a fluidity and confidence that had returned fully now, as if the years away from serious playing had simply melted away. The music soared and swept through the ballroom, carrying everyone present on its emotional journey. In the audience, Thomas sat with his mouth slightly open, his face a mixture of shock and dawning realization. The CEO had put down his phone and was leaning forward in his chair, completely engrossed. Jerry from sales had turned his chair entirely around to stare at the stage, his joke forgotten. As Elena approached the final section of the first movement, she opened her eyes briefly and caught a glimpse of her audience. What she saw nearly broke her concentration. Every face turned toward her, expressions ranging from awe to confusion to delight. No one was talking. No one was eating or drinking. Every person in that ballroom was simply listening, truly hearing her for the first time. She closed her eyes again and poured everything she had into the finale of the movement. Her fingers flew across the keys in the challenging runs, never faltering, finding each note with perfect precision. The music built and built, like a wave growing in power until it crashed magnificently into the final chords. The last note hung in the air for a long moment. Elena sat perfectly still, hands still positioned over the keys, breathing hard from the exertion and emotion of the performance. Then the silence broke, not with polite applause but with a roar. People were on their feet clapping wildly, some with tears in their eyes, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The ovation thundered through the ballroom, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers and washing over Elena like a physical force. She stood slowly, slightly unsteady on her feet, and gave a small bow. The applause grew even louder. When she looked up, she saw people she had worked alongside for years looking at her as if seeing her for the first time, which in a way they were. As she made her way down the steps from the stage, still surrounded by applause, Elena felt lighter than she had in years. Whatever happened next, whatever people said or thought or expected of her, nothing could take away this moment when she had finally allowed her true self to be seen and heard. The applause followed Elena all the way back to her table. People she had worked alongside for years without truly speaking to now reached out to touch her arm, to offer congratulations, to express amazement. She smiled and nodded, her heart still racing from the performance, her hands still tingling from the connection to the piano. That was. Thomas struggled to find words as she took her seat at the accounting table. His face reflected a complex mix of shock, embarrassment, and genuine admiration. "I had no idea you could play like that." "I told you I wouldn't embarrass the company," Elena said quietly. The rest of the showcase continued, but Elena barely noticed the subsequent performances. People kept approaching her table between acts, offering compliments and asking questions she had never been asked before. "Where did you learn to play like that? How long have you been performing? Do you teach? My daughter would love lessons." Even the CEO stopped by, introducing himself as if they had never met, though Elena had prepared reports for him monthly for years. "Remarkable performance, Ms. Morgan," he said, extending his hand. "Truly remarkable. I understand you studied at Juilliard?" "Yes," Elena replied, shaking his hand. "Before I came to Westfield." "Well, we're certainly fortunate to have such talent in our company. Perhaps we can discuss ways to incorporate your musical abilities into future corporate events." Elena smiled politely, but made no promises. The evening continued in a blur of unfamiliar attention. By the time the event concluded, her cheeks hurt from smiling more in one night than she had in months. As people began to leave, Elena made her way back to the stage where the grand piano stood silent now. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them, saying a private goodbye to the instrument that had helped her find her voice again. "It suits you." She turned to find Mr. Chen standing a few feet away. "Dressed in a simple but elegant suit, you came," she said, surprised and touched. "I wouldn't miss it," he replied. "You invited me, remember?" She had almost as an afterthought when leaving practice the day before, never really expecting him to attend. "What did you think?" she asked, suddenly eager for the opinion of the one person who had witnessed her journey over the past 3 weeks. "You played from your heart," he said simply. "Not from your memory, not from your fingers, but from your heart. That is why they all stood for you." Elena felt tears threatening for the first time that evening. "Thank you. For everything, the practice space, the encouragement. I couldn't have done this without your help." "You did this," Mr. Chen corrected gently. "I only provided a piano." As they walked together toward the exit, Jerry from sales approached, his earlier mockery replaced with an almost comical respect. "Elena, that was incredible," he gushed. "Listen, my brother-in-law runs an arts foundation that hosts benefit concerts. Would you consider performing at their spring gala? It pays, of course." Before she could answer, Diane from HR appeared at her elbow. "Elena, the Children's Hospital coordinator, wants your contact information. They're looking for volunteer musicians for their weekly program in the pediatric ward." More people gathered around, each with questions or offers or simple praise. Elena felt overwhelmed by this sudden visibility after years of near invisibility. Mr. Chen noticed her discomfort and gently intervened. "Ms. Morgan has had a long evening," he said firmly. "Perhaps you could contact her at a more appropriate time." With that, he guided Elena through the crowd and into the quiet of the hotel lobby. "Thank you," she said again when they were alone. "It's all a bit much. Success often is," he replied with a small smile. "Good night, Elena. I'll see you Monday morning." She nodded, though in truth she wasn't sure what Monday would bring. Something had shifted fundamentally tonight, and she couldn't yet see where the new path might lead. The weekend passed in a strange, dreamlike state. Elena alternated between playing her keyboard for hours, lost in the rediscovered joy of music, and sitting in silence, contemplating what her performance meant for her future. She had stepped out of the shadow she had lived in for so long. There was no going back to being invisible now. Monday morning arrived with its usual alarm, but Elena didn't rush to silence it. She lay in bed for a few extra minutes, something she never allowed herself to do, and thought about the day ahead. Finally, she rose and dressed with unusual care, choosing a deep blue blouse she rarely wore to the office. The moment she entered the Westfield building, she knew things had changed. The security guard, who had barely glanced at her badge for years now, looked up with recognition. "Morning, Ms. Morgan," he said with a genuine smile. "That was some performance Friday night. My wife hasn't stopped talking about it." In the elevator, people made space for her rather than crowding her into the corner. A few nodded in acknowledgement. One woman even asked if she had been playing piano since childhood. Her floor felt different, too. As she walked to her cubicle, conversations paused and heads turned. Some colleagues offered congratulations or compliments. Others seemed unsure how to interact with this new version of Elena, who had revealed such unexpected depths. At her desk, she found a small envelope propped against her monitor. Inside was a handwritten note from the CEO, requesting a meeting at 11 a.m. Elena stared at it for a long moment, trying to imagine what he might want to discuss. Thomas arrived at her cubicle before she had even turned on her computer. His demeanor was dramatically different from Friday, almost deferential. "Elena, good morning," he said, hovering awkwardly at the entrance to her space. "I just wanted to say again how amazing your performance was. I think I owe you an apology for suggesting you shorten your piece or play something simpler. Clearly, I underestimated your abilities." "Thank you, Thomas," she replied, noting the irony that it had taken a piano performance for her supervisor of 7 years to see her competence. "The CEO was impressed too," Thomas continued. "Between us, I think he's going to ask you to perform at the Regional Leadership Conference next month." Elena nodded but said nothing. The thought of another corporate performance didn't fill her with excitement. What had felt like a personal triumph on Friday now seemed in danger of becoming just another function she would perform for the company, alongside her accounting duties. At 11 o'clock, she made her way to the executive floor for her meeting. The CEO greeted her warmly, inviting her to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his expansive desk. "Ms. Morgan, I'll get right to the point," he began. "Your performance on Friday night was exceptional, and it's made me realize we haven't been utilizing your talents fully here at Westfield." "Thank you, sir," Elena said, waiting for the corporate performance request Thomas had predicted. "I'd like to offer you a new position," he continued. "Our community outreach division has been looking to expand its arts initiative. We sponsor several music programs in local schools, and we've been searching for the right person to oversee those relationships. Given your background and obvious talent, I think you would be perfect for the role." Elena blinked in surprise. "That's not what I was expecting. The position would involve some travel to the schools, coordination with music teachers, and occasional performances at donor events," he explained. "It would be a significant change from your current responsibilities, with a corresponding increase in salary, of course." For a moment, Elena was tempted. It would be a step closer to music, a step away from spreadsheets and invisibility. But something about it still felt like a compromise, using her passion as a corporate tool rather than truly following it. "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully. "Could I have some time to think about it?" "Of course," the CEO replied, clearly expecting her enthusiasm rather than hesitation. "Take the rest of the week if you need it." As she left his office, Elena felt a strange mixture of gratitude and unease. The offer was generous, unexpected, and acknowledged her talent in a way the company never had before. Yet it didn't feel quite right, like a beautiful but ill-fitting dress. Back at her desk, she found an email from the Children's Hospital coordinator, asking if she would consider playing for the children in the long-term care ward. Unlike the corporate offer, this request immediately warmed her heart. The rest of the day passed in a blur of congratulations, questions, and curious glances. By the time she left the office, Elena felt drained from more social interaction than she'd had in months combined. Instead of going straight home, her feet carried her to Mr. Chen's music shop. The closed sign was on the door, but lights glowed inside and she could see him organizing sheet music behind the counter. He looked up at her knock and came to let her in. "I was hoping you might stop by," he said, leading her to the back room where the practice piano waited. "How was your day?" "Strange," Elena admitted, sitting on the bench but not opening the keyboard. "Everyone suddenly sees me. The CEO offered me a new position working with music programs in schools." "That sounds like a good opportunity," Mr. Chen observed, though his tone suggested he heard the hesitation in her voice. "It is," she agreed. But it's not what you want," he finished for her. Elena nodded, relieved that he understood. "How did you know?" "Your eyes," he said simply. "They light up when you play for the love of music. They don't light up when you speak of this job offer." She ran her fingers lightly over the closed piano cover. "The Children's Hospital asked if I would play for their patients. Just thinking about that felt more right than the corporate position." Mr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "I have been meaning to speak with you about something. My niece runs a community music school on the east side of town. They're looking for a piano teacher. The pay is not what you make at your company, I'm sure. But it's teaching music," Elena finished, a sudden warmth spreading through her chest at the thought. "Yes, teaching children mostly, some adults too. People who love music but may never play at Juilliard. People who just want to find their voice as you found yours again." Elena opened the piano cover and played a simple chord, letting the sound fill the room. "Would your niece consider someone who left music behind for 7 years? Someone who played Rachmaninoff the way you did on Friday night?" "I think she would." The next morning, Elena arrived at work early and wrote 2 letters. The first was to the CEO, respectfully declining his offer while expressing her gratitude. The second was her resignation from Westfield Financial, effective 2 weeks from that day. When Thomas read her resignation, his shock was evident. But the CEO's offer? The recognition? Why would you leave now, just when people see what you're capable of? Elena smiled. "Because I finally see what I'm capable of too." Her last day at Westfield was quieter than she expected. People stopped by her desk to wish her well, some expressing genuine regret at her departure. others simply curious about her plans. Thomas organized a small gathering in the break room with cake and awkward speeches. "We'll miss your attention to detail," he said, avoiding any mention of her talent that they had overlooked for years. "And your piano playing," added Raj with more sincerity. "You showed us all something special." As Elena packed her few personal items into a box, the plant, the calendar, the photo of her at the piano that now sat proudly on display, she felt no sadness, only a growing sense of anticipation. She was not leaving something behind so much as moving toward something essential. The following Monday, instead of entering the Westfield building, Elena walked through the doors of the East Side Community Music School. The building was old, the paint peeling in places, but the sounds that greeted her, scales, simple melodies, the occasional wrong note followed by laughter, felt more like home than any office ever had. Mr. Chen's niece, a warm woman named Grace, showed her to a small room with a well-loved upright piano and a view of the playground outside. "Your first student comes at 9, Grace explained. "Ryan, age 8, just starting. He's very excited to meet a real pianist, as he calls it." When the boy arrived, fidgeting with nervous energy, Elena sat him beside her on the bench. His feet dangled, not yet reaching the floor. His fingers were small on the keys. "I'm not very good yet," he warned her. "That's why I'm here," Elena replied, placing her hands beside his to demonstrate the first simple exercise. "Everyone starts somewhere, even Rachmaninoff." As the boy attempted the notes, his face scrunched in concentration, Elena felt a sense of rightness wash over her. This, helping others find their voice through music, this was where she belonged. Not hidden in a cubicle, not performing for corporate events, but here, passing on the gift that had sustained her even in her darkest, quietest years. By the end of the lesson, Ryan had successfully played a simple melody with both hands. His proud grin as he packed up his music book was worth more than any corporate salary. That evening, Elena played at the Children's Hospital for the first time. She chose gentler pieces than Rachmaninoff, Mozart, Debussy, some simple improvisations that seemed to soothe the young patients. When a small girl in a wheelchair asked if she could touch the piano, Elena lifted her onto the bench and guided her fingers to press a few notes. "I made music," the girl whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. "Yes," Elena agreed, recognizing in the child's face the same awakening she had experienced herself. "Yes, you did." As she walked home under the early evening sky, Elena felt a completeness she hadn't known in years. She had been mocked as just an office worker, her depth and passion hidden beneath spreadsheets and quarterly reports. But from the first tone she played, everyone had frozen. And in that moment of silence before the applause, she had finally heard her own voice again, clear and true. Now others would hear theirs too, with her help. That, she realized, was the greatest performance of all,